He who masters himself will never be a slave to others. The coldness that remains silent, observes, and calculates is the true master of destiny. The world doesn't reward kindness, it punishes it. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths a man can face, but it is also the first lesson that separates the naive from those who truly understand how power works. From the earliest days of civilization to the glass-enclosed corridors of modern corporations, the dynamic is the same. Those who show themselves vulnerable, those who insist on acting out of compassion and generosity, end up crushed. This is not just an opinion, not the bitter and isolated vision of a few cynics. It is a silent law that governs human nature. Niccolo Machiavelli, in The Prince, chapter 17, wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both." With this, he was not proclaiming a desire for gratuitous cruelty, but an observation. Love is fickle, dependent on the mood and convenience of others. Fear, on the contrary, is stable, enduring, and disciplining. The man who relies solely on kindness becomes a slave to inconstancy. He who learns to use coldness builds an invisible fortress around himself. Consider how history confirms this law. Cesare Borgia, a central figure cited by Machiavelli in chapter 7, is a clear example. Son of Pope Alexander VI, Cesare rose not through delicacy, but through surgical coldness. When he needed to consolidate power in rebellious territories, he didn't seek popular approval with gestures of kindness or promises of clemency. He ordered Ramiro de Lorca to impose order with an iron fist, terrorizing the population and crushing resistance. When Lorca's cruelty became unbearable and could tarnish his own reputation, Cesare had him executed in a public square. Thus he achieved two things at once. He diverted popular anger from himself and cemented his image as a ruthless yet just ruler. It was a cold, calculated, and profoundly Machiavellian act. The lesson is simple. The ruler who allows himself to be guided by kindness is enslaved by it. The one who understands the value of coldness manipulates perceptions and maintains control. This pattern repeats itself in different spheres, including everyday relationships. Ask yourself, how many times has someone exploited your compassion? How many times have you said yes when you knew you should have said no, just to avoid being seen as cold, selfish, or insensitive? And how many of those times was this gesture of kindness reciprocated with genuine gratitude? The answer, almost always, is bitter. Kindness is not interpreted as a virtue, but as a sign of availability. The world observes your actions and concludes, if he has yielded once, he will yield again. Machiavelli understood this viscerally. In chapter 15 of The Prince, he dismantles the illusion that a ruler must seek to be recognized as virtuous in the eyes of all. He asserts that whoever truly wishes to rule must be prepared to act against goodness, against faith, against humanity, whenever necessary to preserve power, not because it is pleasurable to do so, but because it is inevitable. Kindness opens the door to exploitation. It signals predictability, and predictability is the death of power. Those who are predictable become easy prey. Have you ever noticed that nice guys are always the first to be overwhelmed at work? That they're the ones who lend money and rarely get it back? That they're the ones who are most disappointed in relationships? This is no coincidence. It's the consequence of an ancient rule. Those who display excessive warmth attract coldness in others. And the more warmth they offer, the more coldness they receive in return. Machiavelli said in chapter 28 that a prince must choose his alliances carefully, for by giving power to another, he risks his own ruin. This principle is not limited to rulers. Every time you strengthen someone at your expense, you weaken yourself. Every time you give in, hoping your kindness will be remembered, you open a wound that never heals. Because the memory of kindness is short, but its exploitation is infinite, this hidden mechanism can be observed not only in individuals, but in entire societies. Consider the rise of charismatic leaders who relied on discourses of fraternity and cooperation. Many of them were quickly swallowed up by their own allies, betrayed, and replaced by colder, more calculating figures. History is replete with examples of men who believed that kindness was enough to consolidate authority, and all of them, without exception, were crushed. Machiavelli did not write The Prince not to flatter rulers with illusions, but to strip them of the mask of idealism. He saw politics as it really is, a battlefield where emotions are weapons that turn against those who expose them. You might wonder, is it possible to live without kindness? Doesn't this advice turn men into monsters? Here's a Machiavellian provocation. Monsters are those who feign kindness to seduce and then crush. Being strategically cold doesn't mean being cruel for pleasure, but avoiding being a victim of others' cruelty. Coldness is both defense and attack. It's the shield that protects you and the sword that keeps you respected. When Machiavelli advises princes not to depend on the love of their subjects, he doesn't do so because he despised human affection, but because he knew that affection evaporates at the first sign of difficulty. He reminds us in chapter 17 that men are ungrateful, fickle, deceitful, and dissimulating, averse to danger, greedy of gain. If this is human nature, it's not affection that guarantees stability, but calculation. And what happens when someone insists on living in ignorance of these laws? Imagine a ruler who always shows himself compassionate, always willing to forgive, always trusting in love and kindness. At first, he will be celebrated, but sooner or later, someone will test his limits. He will discover that his compassion is open ground for abuse. Others will follow suit, until this ruler is surrounded by sycophants who exploit him, enemies who fearlessly challenge him, and allies who abandon him at the first opportunity. The same happens to any common man who believes that constant kindness will be reciprocated. On the contrary, it is seen as weakness, as an invitation to exploitation. What Machiavelli offers us is a cruel but lucid lens. Don't expect gratitude, expect interest. Don't expect loyalty, expect convenience. And knowing this, act so as not to be surprised. A historical example helps crystallize this lesson. Louis XVI of France, known for his indecision and attempts at conciliation, tried to maintain his crown by showing benevolence and yielding to pressure from nobles, revolutionaries, and even foreign enemies. His excessive kindness and inability to instill fear made him irrelevant in his own kingdom. He was betrayed, humiliated, and led to the guillotine. In contrast, Napoleon Bonaparte, decades later, understood the Machiavellian principle. He preferred to be feared, preferred to impose military and political discipline, and preferred strategic coldness to sentimentality. The result is clear. While Louis was remembered as the weak king who lost everything, Napoleon became the figure who dominated Europe. The difference between them was not innate talent, but an understanding of human nature and the deliberate use of coldness. This first lesson Machiavelli teaches us is brutal, but necessary. It's not limited to the kings and princes of the past. Today, in the corporate world, in personal relationships, and in the power struggles played out on social media, the principle is the same. Those who show themselves too vulnerable become targets. Those who try to please everyone lose authority. Those who rely on love as the only currency of power discover too soon that this credibility evaporates. What Machiavelli taught is that strategic coldness doesn't destroy one's humanity, but preserves one's position. The cold ruler is one who knows when to act harshly and when to show clemency, but never becomes a slave to kindness. He calculates, decides, and executes, without fear of appearing ruthless, because he knows that respect is more enduring than pity. And here arises the question that echoes in the minds of those who dare reflect on these words. Are you willing to accept that your kindness may be used as a weapon against you? Can you recognize that behind every smile, there is often calculation, and that the naivete of ignoring this is the quickest path to defeat? This is the provocation Machiavelli throws at us when he reveals the true nature of power. He writes not to console, but to unmask. He offers not a manual of virtues, but a map for survival in a world where the innocent are swallowed up and the calculating reign. Concluding this first part, it is necessary to engrave this phrase in our minds. Kindness without strategy is an invitation to ruin. Heat without calculation is a flame that consumes itself. Those who insist on believing that they will be protected by their own generosity will end up crushed by those who see it only as an opportunity for domination. Machiavelli offers us the first key to his work. Learn to be cold or prepare to be discarded. This is the initial judgment, the starting point, the threshold between naivete and power. The world does not belong to the kind. The world belongs to the cold. The most uncomfortable truth is this: kindness is not recognized as a virtue, but used as a weakness. Deep down, everyone knows it. but few have the courage to admit it. When you always make yourself available, when you open your life to others without restrictions, when you make it clear that you prefer the discomfort of your own loss to the discomfort of saying no, you don't earn respect. You awaken predators. This is the second lesson Niccolo Machiavelli teaches us, and perhaps the most difficult to accept, because it requires looking directly at the cruelest aspects of human nature. He said, The Prince, chapter 17, that men are ungrateful, fickle, deceitful, and deceitful, averse to danger and greedy for gain. In view of this, kindness ceases to be a virtue and becomes an invitation. Those who are always kind open the doors to their own ruin and reveal to others the map of their weaknesses. You don't need to go back to Renaissance Florence to see this mechanism at work. Just look around. Think about the last time someone asked you for a favor and used tears, sad stories, or the weight of guilt to convince you. Maybe it was a friend asking to borrow money, a coworker wanting you to take on a task that was their responsibility, a family member who always turns to you at the most inconvenient times. In the moment, you gave in. You thought you were doing the right thing. You even felt a certain pride in your own generosity. But when the time came to repay you, you realized there was no reciprocity. Instead of gratitude, you found excuses. Instead of respect, you found new demands. The kindness went unrecognized. It was registered as weakness, and those who took advantage once will do so again whenever they can. The difference isn't just in the gesture itself, but in what it communicates. You've shown that you can be manipulated, and those who show this once will be manipulated many times. Machiavelli knew this and described in chapter 15 that a prince should not seek to be considered kind above all else, but should appear virtuous only when that appearance serves his interests. This does not mean that he should not, at times, act generously, but rather that he should never become a slave to the image of generosity. Because the day kindness ceases to be useful and becomes a burden, it will drag him down. Constant, uncalculated kindness does not inspire love. It inspires abuse. History shows this cruelly. Consider Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor of Rome. Known for his inclination toward virtue and philosophy, he was beloved by many, but his excessive reliance on human kindness caused his own son, Commodus, to inherit the throne and ruin the empire. Marcus Aurelius believed he could guide with wisdom and benevolence, but by failing to set clear limits, by trusting that human nature could be elevated by philosophy, he allowed his successor to be dominated by vice and cruelty. Kindness did not protect Rome. She condemned her. And the same occurs on a personal level. How many relationships begin with excessive concessions, with the desire to please at any cost, with the attempt to show that I'm not like the others? But sooner or later, this attempt to win through kindness turns into imprisonment. The other party realizes they can demand more, press harder, test more limits, and those who built their identity on human warmth discover too late that they have given up all respect. The result is predictable: contempt. The initial love, born of kindness, turns to disdain, warmth to contempt, and the relationship implodes because no one respects those who don't impose boundaries. What Machiavelli teaches us is that, in any sphere, political, social, or intimate, kindness is not a shield, but a breach. Also note how this dynamic operates in larger groups. At work, those who are always helpful become a repository of responsibilities. Colleagues and superiors know they can overload this employee without him complaining. The result is inevitable. While others preserve their energy and image, the kind person is overwhelmed by tasks that were never his. He wears himself out, consumes himself, exhausts himself, and in the end he receives no promotion or recognition. He is forgotten, because his kindness is not registered as a value, but as an expectation. And expectation does not generate respect. It generates obligation. Thus, the kind person becomes disposable. Conversely, those who know how to set limits, who know when to refuse, who know how to show coolness, are seen as someone with authority. They may even be criticized in silence, but they are respected. And respect, as Machiavelli taught, is the only currency that truly buys lasting power. Perhaps you've asked yourself, why do so many people prefer to approach cold, calculating, even arrogant figures, rather than seek out those who offer affection and attention? The answer is brutal. Human beings respect what they don't fully understand. They respect what they fear losing. They respect what challenges them, but they despise what is always available. The friend who always says yes is not admired. They are used. The colleague who always covers for others is not elevated. They are exploited. The partner who never says no is not valued. They are abandoned. Kindness without coldness does not elicit love. It elicits boredom. The predictability of human warmth inevitably leads to disrespect. This is why Machiavelli insisted, it is better to be feared than loved. Because love can be won with kindness, but fear and respect can only be won with coldness. In political life, examples abound. Cesare Borgia, cited again by Machiavelli, knew he could not sustain power solely with promises or displays of affection. He understood that he needed to command respect before attempting to win love. Therefore, he did not hesitate to be cruel when necessary. The same reasoning can be applied to modern kings and leaders who, when they tried to rule solely through the warmth of kindness, became easy targets for enemies and lost their throne, their country, or their very lives. Louis XVI is remembered for the clemency that never protected him. Lincoln, in the United States, was often accused of coldness and calculation, but it was precisely his ability to impose harsh limits amid the Civil War that preserved the nation's unity. Kindness alone would have led the United States to fragmentation. Calculated coldness kept it together, but perhaps the most uncomfortable part of this lesson is realizing that it's not limited to rulers and presidents, but applies to each of us in everyday situations. Who hasn't been cornered by a request for a favor they didn't want to grant, but gave in just to avoid appearing selfish? Who hasn't found themselves paying a high price for not having the courage to say no? Who hasn't felt drained by people who only show up when they're needed? All of this stems from the same mechanism. Kindness seen not as a virtue, but as an opportunity. And each time you feed this cycle, the weaker it becomes. What begins as compassion ends as a prison. And with each new concession, you lose another piece of your own authority. The unexpected twist is this: kindness can be maintained, but only if it's surrounded by coldness. Calculated kindness is a powerful weapon, but blind kindness is a death sentence. When you act generously, strategically, at specific chosen moments, when that generosity surprises because it's unexpected, it gains strength. But when generosity becomes constant and predictable, it loses value. It's like an inflated currency. The more it circulates, the less it's worth. This is why Machiavelli recommends that a prince not seek to appear kind all the time, but only when it strengthens his position. Controlled kindness is virtue. Uncontrolled kindness is ruin. And herein lies the difference between the cold man and the warm man. The former chooses when to be generous. The latter is a slave to his own need to please. How many destinies have been destroyed by this error? How many careers have foundered because someone believed that by always being kind, loyalty would be rewarded? How many families have imploded because one side gave everything and received nothing in return? How many friendships have died because one always offered more than the other? The pattern is universal, predictable, and almost always denied, because to admit it is to admit that the world is not fair. But Machiavelli didn't believe in divine justice that could correct the earth's imbalances. He believed in human calculation. Those who understand the rule survive. Those who ignore it succumb. The cruelest thing about this second lesson is that it doesn't just ask you to acknowledge exploitation, but to accept that it's inevitable. You can't stop others from trying to manipulate your kindness. There will always be those who use tears, stories, emotional blackmail, and pleas. There will always be those who see you not as a person, but as an opportunity. The only choice you have is between giving in or setting limits, between being used and being respected, between being remembered as the one who was always available and never taken seriously, or as the one whose presence commanded respect and whose absence was felt as a real loss. It's a choice between two possible memories, that of the good guy no one feared or respected, and that of the cold guy no one dared exploit. Which do you prefer? This is the weak point of good men, believing that their kindness will be remembered as a virtue. The stark, hard reality is that your kindness will only be remembered until the next interest arises, and when that happens, no one will hesitate to step over you. That's why Machiavelli insists on dismantling this illusion, because only those who recognize the true nature of things can protect themselves. Only those who understand that kindness without calculation is a path to contempt can begin to build an authority that endures. The rest are children's stories, tales of generous heroes who always end well. But real life is not a story. Real life is a battlefield, and those who insist on entering it unarmed by an excess of kindness will emerge ruined. Concluding this second part, remember these words. Kindness is not a shield. Kindness is a double-edged sword. In the hands of the naive, it cuts whoever wields it. In the hands of the cold, it becomes an instrument of power. When you give without strategy, you surrender to disrespect. When you offer kindness with calculation, you transform it into surprise, into shock, into a psychological weapon no one expected. The secret is not to abandon human warmth, but to prevent it from controlling you. This is the Machiavellian lesson. Never allow your kindness to be predictable, because predictability is a death sentence in the game of power. Respect is born of coldness. The intelligent use of kindness is only valuable when rare. The weak flesh of good men is what leads them to their downfall. The cold steel of strategists is what leads them to dominance. The common mind sees betrayals as tragedies. The common mind sees losses as definitive defeats. The common mind sees disappointments as injustices that should never have happened. But the cold mind, shaped by Machiavellian logic, sees all this with different eyes. It does not lament. It does not despair. It collects every fragment of pain as if it were raw gold, every scar as if it were secret information, every tear as if it were a map of human behavior. The cold strategist knows that life is neither fair nor unfair, only brutal. And so he transforms every impact into a stepping stone. Machiavelli, in Chapter 3 of The Prince, already stated that conquering a territory requires understanding the habits, laws, and inclinations of its inhabitants. In other words, victory is not born of indignation, but of observation. The betrayed who observes understands more about their betrayer than the one who merely suffers. The defeated who analyzes their defeat understands the game better than the one who only mourns their own misfortune. Coldness is, above all, an ability to see without the fog of emotions. A cool mind doesn't ask, "Why did this happen to me?" but, "What does this reveal about the world?" This is the turning point that separates the ordinary from the strategists. While many repeat that they were victims, the cool mind collects data. While the emotional man drowns in resentment, the calculating man delves into the other's behavior to map their weaknesses. The insult received today is ammunition for tomorrow's response. The betrayal suffered now is a dossier that will be useful later. Even the most painful loss can be turned into an advantage if analyzed accurately. The world doesn't distinguish between those who mourn and those who analyze, but history does. Those who learn quickly rise. Those who merely suffer fade. Coldness doesn't kill emotions, but quarantines them so they don't interfere with calculation. It slows reaction, controls impulse, and allows each step to be taken at the right time, not in despair. But have you ever wondered how many times your life could have been different if, instead of reacting immediately, you had simply waited? How many words spoken in moments of anger have ended relationships that could have been useful? How many decisions made in the heat of the moment have opened doors to enemies? And if you had remained silent, simply observing, wouldn't you have more accumulated power today? This is the difference between the ordinary gaze and the cold gaze. The ordinary rushes, the cold waits. And waiting is not passivity, it is preparation. A historical example, Julius Caesar, when betrayed by Brutus and the senators, was not defeated by the betrayal itself, but by his haste in trusting. If he had maintained a colder gaze, if he had analyzed the signs, he could have anticipated the blow. Augustus, his successor, learned from his uncle's fall. He built a network of observation, cultivated information, watched allies and enemies with the patience of a predator. The result? He consolidated the empire and was called the father of Rome. What brought Caesar down was the emotion of trust. What elevated Augustus was the coldness of vigilance. The same thing happens everywhere. Those who learn quickly from their scars win. Those who merely bleed disappear. In everyday life, this translates into situations everyone knows. The friend who betrayed you with gossip should not only be hated, but studied. What need led him to speak? What benefit did he seek? What behavioral patterns betrayed him beforehand? A cool mind uses even its own pain as field research. The partner you disappointed serves not only as a lament, but as a living manual of how people act when they have the opportunity to deceive. The colleague who brought you down at work shows how far someone will go when the environment favors ambition. Every disappointment, if analyzed, is a secret room opened within the human labyrinth. And every time you ignore this opportunity to observe, you waste intelligence. A cool mind wastes nothing. It collects. How many times have you fallen into the same emotional trap simply because you failed to analyze the previous pattern? How many times have you been deceived by the same type of person because you didn't view the previous experience as a lesson, but rather as a tragedy? How many more betrayals will it take before you learn that the fault lies not only in others, but in your own lack of calculation? An icy gaze transforms even failure into a future victory. A company that went bankrupt reveals lessons about cash flow, toxic alliances, and arrogance disguised as optimism. A relationship that imploded shows exactly which signs you ignored, which warnings you chose not to heed. A humiliation you suffered reveals not only the other person's cruelty, but also your blind spot. The common mind sees humiliation as defeat. The cold mind sees it as an X-ray. This is why Machiavelli said in chapter 25 that fortune governs half of human actions, but the other half is under our control. The cold mind understands that fortune, or chance, can bring them down, but what they do with that downfall defines their future. They don't repeat mistakes. They archive them. They aren't guided by fear, but by calculation. They are the scientist of human relations, testing hypotheses with each new disappointment. But have you ever noticed that many who seem lucky actually just have a bad memory? That those who never fall into the same trap twice are the same ones who mentally note every detail of the previous betrayal? And have you ever noticed that your greatest weakness lies not in your mistakes, but in your forgetfulness? The cool mind becomes a genius because it doesn't forget. It archives offenses like valuable documents. It transforms falls into secret manuals. While others move on as if nothing had happened, it builds an invisible library of human patterns. And it is in this library that its true strength lies. When Machiavelli states in chapter 68 that princes must know how to use both the nature of the fox and that of the lion, he is saying that coolness gathers information like the fox, but acts brutally when necessary, like the lion. It's not about choosing between cunning or force, but about using both at the right time. The cool man understands this. He waits, observes, gathers data, and only then acts with lethal precision. What would happen if you began to see each pain as a secret manual for life? How would your worldview change if, instead of feeling wronged, you saw yourself as privileged to have access to information that the naive will never decipher? And if each loss were interpreted as an investment in your future power, how many pains would you begin to embrace in silence, only to turn them into an arsenal? This is the paradox of the icy gaze. It doesn't run from pain, it collects it. It doesn't reject betrayal, it studies it. It doesn't fear defeat, it dissects it. Because each one is food for the intellect. The common man mourns loss, the strategist builds a map with it. The common man laments injustice, the cold discovers where the world is most vulnerable. It is in this silent movement of collecting wounds and transforming them into weapons that the cold mind achieves genius. It's not a supernatural gift, it's a method. The method of never wasting anything, of never ignoring patterns, of never letting emotion override observation. Are you willing to adopt this perspective, or will you continue to allow each wound to be just a scar without learning? Will you be the one who forgets or the one who files? Will you be the one who suffers or the one who collects? Emotions are the most beautiful and at the same time the most treacherous trap that nature has imposed on us. They were born to protect, but they ended up becoming invisible chains that enslave us. Fear, love, anger, sadness, euphoria, all these primitive impulses that shaped survival in caves, are today mechanisms that betray us silently. Imagine prehistoric man faced with a shadow in the forest. If he fled out of fear, he survived. If he stayed to investigate, he might die. In this context, emotion was a tool. But centuries later, in boardrooms, in political disputes, in million-dollar negotiations, or in complex personal relationships, this same reaction becomes ruin. The fear of confronting someone powerful paralyzes. Miscalculated love ruins empires. Anger makes men reveal their best-kept secrets. Blind optimism leads entire societies to economic collapse. Emotions, when not controlled, are useless. They enslave. And that is why Machiavelli, in The Prince, chapter 17, stated that rulers should not rely on the love of their subjects, but rather on discipline and fear, because love is fleeting and fear is constant. He knew that the most celebrated emotion is also the most fickle, and that no solid power can be built on shifting sands. Consider how emotions have ruined leaders who might have reigned for decades. Alexander the Great was defeated not by his enemies, but by his own impulsiveness, born of anger and drunkenness. It is said that he killed Clitus, one of his most loyal generals, in a fit of rage. This act not only eliminated a valuable ally, but also made his soldiers question their stability. Napoleon, in his later years, allowed himself to be overcome by excessive ambition and self-confidence, another emotion disguised as virtue. Instead of consolidating what he had conquered, he went beyond his limits, trying to subdue Russia in the dead of winter. Emotion blinded him to strategic calculation. The result was the loss of an entire army and the beginning of his downfall. In both cases, emotions not only influenced but determined the fate of empires. The lesson is clear. A man who cannot control his emotions cannot govern himself, much less others. But don't think this is limited to distant history. The same thing happens in our own time. How many businessmen have lost fortunes because they got carried away by the euphoria of a financial bubble, ignoring obvious facts? The tulip crisis in the Netherlands in the 17th century is a curious and almost improbable example. Common flowers became worth more than houses, simply because collective desire, inflated by greed, transformed a simple bulb into a speculative currency. The collapse was devastating and left its mark across generations. More recently, in modern economic crises, we see how fear of collapse or unbridled greed moves billions in minutes. Collective emotion has the power to ruin entire nations. Now imagine this reduced to the scale of a single person. How many decisions have you made based on a momentary impulse, only to realize later that cold-bloodedness would have led to a much more favorable outcome? How many times have you bought something, said something, signed something, acted solely on emotion? And how many times have you paid dearly for it? Emotion promises comfort, but delivers regret. Emotions also distort the perception of time. Fear makes the present seem unbearable, and naive hope makes the future seem assured. Both are illusions. How many people stay in abusive relationships simply because love tells them it can change? How many hold miserable jobs because emotional hope makes them believe one day they will be recognized? How many remain silent in the face of injustice because fear whispers that it's better not to expose yourself? This emotional self-deception is a gilded prison. You believe you're safe, but in reality, you're being corroded from within. The cool mind observes and concludes, there is no safety in illusions. There is only safety in calculation. This is why Machiavelli, in chapter 15, said that the prudent prince must learn not to be good whenever kindness puts his own survival at risk. Emotions say, always be good and you will be loved. Reality shows, always be good and you will be exploited. A curious fact may surprise you here. Modern cognitive psychology studies have shown that over 70% of human decisions are made under strong emotional influence and only later rationalized by logic. This means that in practice, most of what you call a conscious decision is just a justification for an emotional impulse. You decide, feel, act, and only later invent a logical reason to believe it was strategic. Cold-bloodedness consists of inverting this process. Observe first, calculate later, act last, always placing emotion under suspicion. It's almost like living permanently distrustful of yourself. But this distrust is power. It prevents you from being your own enemy. Have you ever wondered how many of your greatest downfalls were the result of your emotions and not your enemies? How many mistakes could you have avoided if you had distrusted your feelings instead of blindly trusting? Emotions also fuel enemies. Those who master their own emotions but understand those of others govern without resistance. See how political leaders exploit mass emotions. Fear is used in campaigns to control votes. Hatred is cultivated to divide societies and govern without opposition. Hope is sold in speeches, even when there is no real basis. This control is not new. Machiavelli already taught in chapter 17 that men judge more with their eyes than with their hands, and that those who know how to manipulate appearances govern more than those who merely practice virtue. In other words, emotions are the quickest shortcut to power, but also the deadliest trap for those who believe in them too much. The ruler who allows himself to be deceived by his own illusions is lost. The subject who believes too much in promises is a slave. The strategist who observes from the outside, however, knows how to manipulate without being manipulated. But how can we apply this to everyday life? Think about the moment someone tried to provoke you with insults. The emotional response would be to react, yell, and return the insult. The cool response is to remain silent and observe. What did that insult reveal about the other person? What insecurity did it expose? What weakness did they let slip? Often, the aggressor reveals more about themselves than you could discover in years of living together. Emotion, if controlled, becomes a weapon. If not, it becomes a trap. Another example, a negotiation in which you display anxiety reveals your weakness. The other side senses your haste and uses it to extract concessions. However, when you remain cool, patient, and silent, you create discomfort, and the other person's discomfort becomes your asset. Emotion, when controlled, is a mask. When unleashed, it is a confession. There are unlikely events that shockingly reveal this mechanism. During World War II, Alan Turing and his team at Bletchley Park managed to decipher the Enigma code used by the Nazis. But to avoid revealing that they had broken the code, they had to allow German attacks to occur, sacrificing lives to maintain strategic composure. Imagine the emotional toll of this calculation, letting innocents die to preserve an advantage that would save millions later. It's the most brutal proof that controlling emotion is the difference between losing a war and winning. The emotional reaction would have been to act immediately, saving everyone in the short term, but revealing the secret and losing the war in the long run. Calculated composure, however cruel it may seem, was what preserved the balance of the world. How often do you act like someone who gives away your advantage on impulse, when you could save it for the right moment? Another unlikely case. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world was hours away from nuclear war. The dominant emotion was fear, which could have driven the US and Soviet Union to push buttons out of desperation. But it was precisely composure, hidden messages, silent negotiations, and the ability to bide their time that prevented the end of civilization. Emotion pushes you toward the precipice. Calculation maintains balance. How many of your personal conflicts have come close to exploding simply because you didn't know how to wait? How many times would a simple pause have changed everything? Silence and waiting are tools of composure. Impulse and lack of control are weapons against yourself. The unexpected is realizing that emotions aren't just internal weaknesses, but also external technologies. Today, social media algorithms map exactly what triggers fear, anger, or desire in you. Every click, every reaction, every second of attention is recorded. Platforms don't need to convince you rationally, they simply need to activate your emotions. An alarming headline makes you click. An outraged image makes you share. An exaggerated news story makes you argue. And while you lose yourself in emotion, someone collects data, someone makes money, someone consolidates power. Emotions, beyond political weapons, are now commodities. Coldness is more urgent than ever, because it's not just about dominating rulers and soldiers, but about resisting machines that know how to manipulate the human heart with more precision than any Renaissance despot could dream. Have you ever wondered how many of your opinions are truly yours, and how many were induced by engineered emotional stimuli? We come to the harshest revelation. Emotions don't disappear. They are always present, but they can be converted into tools. A cool mind doesn't repress emotions, but rather uses them to serve calculation. Anger can be fuel to act at the right moment. Fear can be a wake-up call to prepare more carefully. Desire can be the strength to move beyond mediocrity, but neither should take over. Machiavelli understood this when he said in chapter 5 that the prince must resist fortune with audacity, but also with prudence. Audacity without calculation is suicide. Prudence without action is stagnation. Coldness balances both forces, using emotion as a servant, not a master. If there's one rule that should be engraved in this section, it's this: never trust the first order your emotions give you. They will almost always lead you to defeat. What feels like urgency is usually a trap. What feels like comfort is often weakness. What seems right is often reckless. Coldness isn't the absence of emotion, but mastery over it. It's choosing not to act in the heat of the moment. It's deciding based on the outcome, not relief. It's building power on solid rocks, not on shifting sand. It's accepting that every emotion is a disguise, a mask that nature created to deceive you, and that only those who look behind it see what truly matters. Emotions are treacherous because they make promises they never keep. Love promises eternity and delivers weariness. Fear promises security and delivers imprisonment. Anger promises justice and delivers destruction. Optimism promises victory and delivers carelessness. They are all peddlers of illusions. The cold mind buys only what can be measured, proven, and repeated. Therefore, the cold win. They are not stronger, nor more intelligent, just less deluded. The true genius is not the one who feels more, but the one who is not fooled by what they feel. This is the secret that has spanned centuries and remains intact. Mastering emotions is not about becoming stone, but about becoming impossible to manipulate. And you, are you willing to distrust even yourself? Are you ready to accept that the voice you hear inside your mind, often charged with emotion, is not a guide, but a saboteur? Will you endure the discomfort of acting coolly when everything inside you screams for impulse? This is the line that separates the ordinary from those who dominate. The ordinary surrender to their emotions and are ruled by them. The cold use them as tools and rule the world. Silence is one of the most powerful weapons that ever existed, and few have understood its true value. Most people fear silence because it's uncomfortable, as if the absence of words were an accusation or a void that needs to be filled. This anxiety about breaking the silence is precisely what gives power to the other. Those who talk too much expose themselves. Those who explain too much reveal themselves. Those who try to justify themselves too much are already in a position of weakness. Silence, on the other hand, is both a shield and a sword. It protects because it hides intentions, and attacks because it forces the other to bare themselves in the face of their own uncertainty. How many times has a simple pause in a conversation not made the other person rush to reveal what you didn't ask? How many times has silence not provoked promises, confessions, and concessions that would never have happened had you spoken? This is where coldness finds its most elegant weapon, the calculated absence of words. Machiavelli understood this profoundly. He said, in The Prince, chapter 58, that rulers must know how to disguise their intentions and master the art of appearing to be what they are not. Silence is the most absolute form of disguise because it reveals nothing, gives nothing away, and can be used against those who remain silent. Silence is both a mask and a wall. Imagine a negotiation in which, faced with a proposal, you don't respond immediately. The other person waits for your reaction, but you just stare. The silence drags on. Each second weighs like lead. Your opponent begins to feel they've said too much, revealed too soon, offered too little. So, they add more information, make an unexpected concession, or betray their insecurity. You didn't need to raise your voice, threaten, or state your position. You simply let the silence work. The other person's discomfort turns into your advantage. This is the invisible weapon that everyone underestimates until they are wounded by it. But silence doesn't act alone. It walks alongside another, even more powerful force: reputation. Your reputation is a shadow that enters everywhere before you. It's the invisible version of yourself, shaped not by who you are, but by what others believe you to be. And herein lies the paradox few realize. Reputation is worth more than the truth. It doesn't matter if you're truly strong as long as everyone believes you are. It doesn't matter if you're ruthless, as long as everyone fears you might be. Reputation is armor because it prevents unnecessary battles. How many enemies have refrained from attacking simply because they believed they would be crushed? How many competitors have given up before even facing you, simply because your image already intimidated them? Machiavelli explains in chapter 91 that the best way for a prince to gain respect is through great deeds and the careful choice of his allies, because then his fame precedes his actions. In other words, reputation is more effective than strength. It wins before the fight begins. However, reputation is also a double-edged sword. It can protect, but it can also betray. Those who build it on empty words expose themselves to downfall. How many leaders have lost everything because the image they maintained didn't stand the first real test? True reputation is born of discipline and consistency. It is built when you deliver on your promises, when you don't threaten in vain, when your few words are always backed up by actions. The cold man doesn't talk much, but when he does, he delivers. The cold ruler doesn't constantly threaten, but when he acts, his action is devastating. This consistency creates a reputation so solid that, over time, it's no longer necessary to fight. Others fight against their own imagination of who you are. The fear your reputation inspires replaces the need for real war, and that is the most complete victory, winning without fighting. But have you ever wondered how your life would be different if people feared you more than they expected compassion from you? Have you ever wondered how many conflicts would be avoided if your mere presence were enough to command respect? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to not have to constantly justify yourself because your reputation would speak for itself? This is the promise of coldness, to transform silence into a weapon and reputation into a shield. Most don't realize they waste energy trying to explain, convince, and justify. Meanwhile, cold strategists guard their words, pick their battles, and let their reputation work for them. Human warmth seeks to win through sympathy. Coldness conquers through silent fear. The tension arises when we understand that reputation is not just personal, but collective. Entire peoples have been protected by the fame of their armies, even when they were weakened. Spartan Greece, for example, intimidated enemies long before war broke out, because its reputation for military discipline was enough to sow fear. Even when the odds were against them, its fame protected them. However, when its reputation was eroded, Sparta ceased to be feared. The same occurred with the Roman Empire. As long as its reputation for invincibility was preserved, its enemies hesitated. But when signs of weakness emerged, the avalanche of barbarian invasions could no longer be contained. What crumbled first was not military strength, but image. The decline began in reputation, and only later reached reality. This is the danger of negligence, losing the invisible armor that sustains authority. In everyday life, the same applies on a smaller scale. The professional who consistently meets deadlines and delivers consistent results builds a reputation that protects them. They don't need to beg for recognition, because their image already precedes them. The same happens with those who know how to set clear boundaries. Gradually, others understand that they are not someone to be exploited, and this builds lasting respect. Those who accept everything, talk too much, and never deliver exactly what they promise, build a reputation for weakness. And this reputation haunts them. Even when they try to change, others no longer believe them. Their image betrays them. This is why Machiavelli warned in chapter 99 that the prince must avoid being despised and hated at all costs, because these are the poisons of authority. Being loved may be unstable, but being despised is fatal. And the difference between the two destinies lies in the carefully constructed reputation. The unexpected is realizing that reputation and silence feed off each other. The less you say, the more people imagine, and the more they imagine, the more your reputation grows. Silence creates mystery. Mystery creates respect. Respect creates reputation, and reputation strengthens silence. It's a perfect cycle. But this cycle only works when there's consistency. If silence is empty, if reputation isn't backed by real action, sooner or later the mask slips. A balance must be struck between the absence of words and the presence of actions. The cold strategist knows this. He doesn't waste promises, but he doesn't let his absence appear weak. He knows when to act to reinforce his image, and when to remain silent and let it work itself out. And what happens when someone manages to perfectly combine silence and reputation? A figure emerges who dominates any space without raising their voice. Think of certain leaders who speak little, but whose gaze is enough to silence a room. Think of generals or businessmen who, upon entering, make everyone adjust their posture, even without saying a word. This is the effect of invisible power. It's not physical strength that dominates, but the aura built over time. This aura is the epitome of coldness. It's the inevitable consequence of someone who masters their emotions, controls what they reveal, and builds an unshakable image. Silence becomes presence. Reputation becomes a wall, and others obey, often without even knowing why. But how far would you bear the weight of this silence? How much discipline would you have to build this reputation, knowing that every slip-up could ruin it? How far would you be willing to give up the need to be understood, to be respected in silence? This is the final tension this section leaves hanging in the air. Most seek to speak, explain, and convince. The few who learn to remain silent and act build a presence that survives even when they are not present. And that is why reputation is armor, and silence is a sword. The world belongs to those who know when to say nothing, because silence echoes louder than words. At this point, after exploring each layer of Machiavellian lessons, it's no longer just theory or distant history. What has been revealed so far is not a simple set of ideas, but a hidden map drawn over centuries by those who dared to see human nature as it truly is. These are not words to entertain or phrases to quote, but tools to transform your presence, your way of acting, and the way the world responds to you. What Machiavelli offered in The Principe wasn't a book for bookworms, but a survival manual for those who want to stand firm in a world where almost everyone gives in. Now, the question isn't whether you understand. The question is whether you have the courage to apply it. Because understanding is easy, applying is painful. It requires deconstructing beliefs, abandoning illusions, facing the discomfort of change, and enduring the loneliness that accompanies those who choose strategic coldness. But it is precisely this loneliness that opens the doors to respect. Being dangerously cold doesn't mean being empty of emotions or incapable of feeling. On the contrary, it means feeling without being controlled by those feelings. It's being able to look someone who insults you in the eye without reacting with immediate fury. It's being able to say no without guilt, knowing that each unnecessary concession steals a piece of your power. It's seeing each betrayal not as a tragedy, but as a free manual on the human mind. It's accepting that kindness can be useful, but only when chosen as a weapon, not a prison. Coldness doesn't reject warmth. It just doesn't distribute it without calculation. Knows that each act of generosity, even if rare and unexpected, weighs more than 1,000 predictable acts. It understands that silence isn't absence, but amplified presence. And that reputation, once solidified, is worth more than any argument. Putting this into practice requires discipline. The next time you feel like justifying yourself, stop. Remember that the more you talk, the more ammunition you give the other person. The next time you receive a request and know you don't want to comply, say no without apology. Notice how the initial reaction will be one of shock, but how this shock will soon turn to respect. The next time you receive an emotional attack, don't respond. Observe. See how the other person, without your reaction, loses balance and reveals themselves. Apply the rule of waiting. Apply the rule of calculating before acting. Apply the rule of turning every pain into a given. If you do this repeatedly, even in small situations, you'll notice that something begins to change around you. People will treat you differently. Those who previously abused you will think twice. Those who previously ignored your presence will begin to feel you. It's in this almost imperceptible detail that transformation is born. The path to strategic coolness is not linear. There will be times when you give in, times when emotion takes over, times when the old need to please speaks louder. But this is where discipline comes in. Each mistake will be another lesson, each setback another opportunity to archive information. It's not about perfection, but about consistency. The more often you can choose calculation over impulse, the more solid you will become. And sooner or later, this practice will cease to be effort and become instinct. You will no longer have to remind yourself to act coolly. You will simply be cool. Your silence will be natural. Your reputation will be a consequence. Your gaze, alone, will be enough to impose presence. And this is precisely where the power that few achieve resides, when strategy ceases to be method and becomes identity. Think about the impact this change can have not only on your personal life, but on every sphere. At work, you'll stop being the one who always sacrifices and become the one whose time is valued. In relationships, you'll stop being the one who always gives more and become the one whose absence weighs heavily. Among friends, you'll stop being the predictable voice that's always available and become the rare presence everyone respects. In the eyes of others, you'll no longer be seen as manipulable, but as impenetrable. This is the point at which people begin to give you space, not out of courtesy, but out of respect. And respect, once earned, opens doors that kindness never opened. Because respect doesn't ask for favors. It sets boundaries. Those who respect it don't dare exploit it. Those who fear it don't dare betray it. Those who admire it don't dare ignore it. But be careful. Becoming dangerously cold isn't everyone's destiny. Many can't bear the burden of loneliness that comes with power. Many prefer to be loved and exploited rather than respected and feared. Many still believe in the illusion that kindness is enough. These will remain in the cycle of predictability. What Machiavelli offers is a path for the few, and it is precisely because it is for the few that it is valuable. He didn't write to please, he wrote to warn. He didn't offer a broad road, but a narrow corridor, illuminated only by the flame of lucidity. Those who choose to traverse it must leave behind the need for constant approval. They must accept that not everyone will understand their actions, and that some will even call them too cold, too distant, too calculating. But what they don't understand is that every label they place on them stems from the respect they cannot deny. They can accuse, they can criticize, but they cannot ignore. In the end, what's at stake isn't just power over others, but power over yourself. It's freeing yourself from the invisible prison of uncontrolled emotions, other people's expectations, emotional blackmail, and the need to be accepted. It's building an inner fortress where nothing enters without your permission. It's deciding that your actions won't be dictated by anger, fear, or guilt, but by the cold calculation of what serves and what destroys. This fortress isn't built all at once, but brick by brick, gesture by gesture, choice by choice. And each choice of coldness is one more brick. Each calculated silence is a higher wall. Each no, said without guilt, is one less door for others to invade your space. Until one day, you look around and realize you're in a different position. Not because you sought to be loved, but because you became unbreakable. This is the fate reserved for those who dare to apply it. Not for those who merely listen, not for those who merely repeat phrases, but for those who truly change their ways of acting. You can no longer say you don't know. You can no longer say you weren't warned. Now the responsibility is yours. Either you continue as always, predictable, manipulated, exploited, or you decide to cross the line and become dangerous. The choice isn't comfortable, but it's definitive. Those who cross this line never turn back. Those who experience the power of coldness don't want to return to the burden of naive kindness. That's why this decision must be made seriously, because it changes everything. It redefines not only how others see you, but how you see yourself. And how you see yourself is the basis of all your choices. Machiavelli concludes in The Prince, chapter 5, that men can resist fortune if they are bold, but that only those who know how to adapt to change survive. Being cold is precisely this, adapting to the worst of human nature, so as not to be devoured by it. It is accepting that life does not reward naivete, but that it does reward strategy. It is understanding that respect lasts longer than affection, that silence cuts deeper than 1,000 words, that reputation is a wall stronger than armies. This is the legacy you can choose to carry, not a legacy of fragility, but of strength, not a legacy of tears, but of victories, not a legacy of illusions, but of lucidity. Now that you've come this far, you need to take a practical step. Choose a situation in your life where you tend to give in to emotion, just one. Decide next time to act coolly. It could be a request for a favor that you always accept, an argument in which you always explode, a demand where you always justify yourself. Just once, apply coolness. Observe the result, see the difference. This small experience will be enough to show that the theory is not distant, but applicable. And when you taste it, you'll see that it's not just philosophy or history, but a weapon that changes everything. Once you taste the difference, repeat it. Once you repeat it, turn it into a habit. Once it's a habit, turn it into an identity. And when it becomes an identity, you will be someone impossible to manipulate, impossible to exploit, impossible to ignore. You will be someone who not only read Machiavelli, but who has become the practical embodiment of his lessons. And this is where this journey ends, but your transformation begins. It's no longer about what Machiavelli said, but about what you will do with what you heard. It's not about phrases to impress others, but about choices to impress yourself. The world does not belong to those who hope to be understood, but to those who make themselves impenetrable. The world does not belong to those who long to be loved, but to those who command respect. The world does not belong to those who demand space, but to those who occupy it. The world belongs to the dangerously cold, and now the decision is before you. Either remain predictable and manipulable, or become untouchable. If this message resonated with you, watch this video now. If any particular lesson touched you, leave a comment, even if anonymous, because your reflection can help others see the same path. And if you want to continue delving into the darkest, most powerful, and transformative strategies ever revealed, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This is just the beginning. The journey continues, but only for those who dare to cross the threshold. Power awaits you. Coldness is your weapon. And the world, as it always has been, belongs to those who know how to play.